Hello and welcome to MBKM Models. Please don't forget to like, share, subscribe and follow for more aircraft documentaries and model build videos. The Centurion was the primary British Army main battle tank of the post-World War II period. Introduced in 1945, it is widely considered to be one of the most successful post-war tank designs, remaining in production into the 1960s, and seeing combat into the 1980s. The chassis was adapted for several other roles, and these variants have remained in service. It was a very popular tank with good armor, maneuverability, and armament. Development of the Centurion began in 1943 with manufacture beginning in January 1945. 6 prototypes arrived in Belgium less than a month after the war in Europe ended in May 1945. It entered combat with the British Army in the Korean War in 1950 in support of the UN forces. The Centurion later served on the Indian side in the Indo-Pakistani War of 1965, where it fought against US-supplied M47 and M48 Patton tanks, and it served with the Royal Australian Armoured Corps in the Vietnam War. Israel's army used Centurions in the 1967 Six-Day War, the 1973 Yom Kippur War, the 1978 South Lebanon conflict, and the 1982 Lebanon War. Centurions modified as armoured personnel carriers were used in Gaza, the West Bank and on the Lebanese border. The Royal Jordanian Land Force used Centurions, first in 1970 to fend off a Syrian incursion within its borders during the Black September events and later in the Golan Heights in 1973. South Africa deployed its Centurions in Angola during the South African Border War. The Centurion became one of the most widely used tank designs, equipping dozens of armies around the world, with some in service until the 1990s. In the 2006 Israel-Lebanon conflict, the Israel Defense Forces employed modified Centurions as armored personnel carriers and combat engineering vehicles. The South African National Defense Force still employs over 200 Centurions, which were modernized in the 1980s and 2000s as the Elephant. Between 1946 and 1962. 4,423 Centurions were produced, consisting of 13 basic marks and numerous variants. In British Army use it was replaced by the Chieftain and Conqueror tanks. Deployment in Western Europe. By early 1952, with the Cold War heating up, NATO needed modern heavy tanks to meet the T-34 versions with the Warsaw Pact countries, and to deter Soviet forces by stationing them with the BOR in West Germany, where the French had just the light AMX-13 and the Germans had none. America was keen to have Centurions supplied to Denmark and the Netherlands under the Mutual Defense Assistance Program, as production of the M48 Patton would not start until April 1952. A Mark III cost £31,000 or £44,000 with ammunition. The Royal Canadian Armoured Corps deployed a regiment of Centurions to Germany to support the Canadian Brigade. During the Suez Crisis, British Ground Commander General Sir Hugh Stockwell believed that methodical and systematic armoured operations centred on the Centurion would be the key to victory. The Egyptians destroyed Port Said's inner harbour, which forced the British to improvise and use the fishing harbour to land their forces. The 2nd Brigade of the Parachute Regiment landed by ship in the harbour. Centurions of the British 6th Royal Tank Regiment were landed, and by 1200 hours they had reached the French paratroopers. While the British were landing at Port City, the men of the 2 RPC at Raswa fought off Egyptian counterattacks featuring Su-100 tank destroyers. After establishing themselves in a position in downtown Port Said, 42 Commando headed down the Shah-e Muhammad Ali, the main north-south road, to link up with the French forces at the Raswa Bridge and the Inner Basin Lock. While doing so, the Marines also took Port Said's gasworks. Meanwhile, 40 Commando supported by the Royal Tank Regiment remained engaged in clearing the downtown of Egyptian snipers. Lieutenant Colonel Norman Taylor arranged for more reinforcements to be brought in via helicopter. Middle East. The first country which bought Centurion tanks was Egypt. The first tanks were received in 1950. Israel's formerly British Centurions were first delivered in 1959. Differing varieties of the Centurion were bought by Israel over the years from many different countries or captured in combat. Following their acquisition, the Israelis quickly upgraded the tanks with British 105mm L7 instead of the original 20-pounder main gun and renamed them Shot Scourge or Whip. When the Six-Day War broke out in 1967, the Israel Defense Forces had 293 Centurion shot tanks that were ready for combat out of a total of 385 tanks. In Sinai, Egypt had 30 Centurion tanks. All 30 Egyptian tanks were destroyed or captured by Israel during the conflict. Israel also captured about 30 Jordanian Centurion tanks from a total of 90 in Jordanian service. 25 tanks were abandoned in Hebron by the 10th Jordanian Independent Tank Regiment. All shot tanks were upgraded with the more efficient Continental AVDS 1792A diesel engine that was also used in the M48 and the M60 tanks, and an Allison CD 8506 transmission from 70 to 1974. The upgraded version were named Shotgal Aleph and were followed by 3 additional subvariants called Bet, Gimel and Dalet according to the upgrades added. The upgrades included thicker armor, new turret rotating mechanism, new gun stabilizer, improved ammunition layout with more rounds and increased fuel capacity, a modern fire control system, an improved fire extinguisher system, better electrical system and brakes, and the capability of installing reactive armor completed the modifications. They had American radios and either the original 7.62mm caliber MG on the commander's cupola or a 12.7mm caliber HMG. The Shotgal could be distinguished from the Centurion by its raised rear deck, to accommodate the bigger engine. Thanks for watching, thanks for listening, and until next time.